Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, and today our special guest is Jethro Waters. So Jethro is a multi-award-winning writer, director, producer, and cinematographer whose work spans documentary, narrative film, music videos, and experimental cinema. His documentary feature debut, F11 and Be There, was a New York Times Critics' Pick, won an Emmy Award, screened internationally, and is available on platforms including Apple TV, Amazon Prime, PBS, and Canopy. His music videos for artists such as Cale and Angel Olsen have been featured in major publications including The New Yorker, Rolling Stone, and The New York Times. Waters makes his narrative feature debut with Gunfighter Paradise, for which he wrote, produced, and directed with a poster hand-painted by legendary artist Renato Casaro. He has collaborated on acclaimed projects including Desperate Souls, Dark City, and The Legend of Midnight Cowboy, and created films on architecture and design featuring figures such as Tadao Ando. His experimental and short films have been screened in museums and international exhibitions. So welcome, Jethro.
Thank you so much, JF. I appreciate it.
You've done a lot of stuff. Like you have visual arts, like you're doing music videos. Like what drew you to filmmaking and doing all these visual projects?
It was actually writing. Funny enough, I mean that's that makes this podcast makes sense for that because I started, as we all do in our teens, writing just some of the worst slop ever. But I really enjoyed it, And in my English classes, that seemed to be the one thing that I really gravitated towards. Was I was really terrible at math. I still am. Barely got by in biology and chemistry and those kinds of things. But English and writing and thinking about stories really started very early for me. And so that's just kind of led the way. And I had some musical instruments my dad gave to me, and so I was playing music and writing stories and doing kinds of things like that until I got my hands on a camera and started to put the pieces together. But it was my mom kept us in libraries growing up, so I read a lot and watched a lot of movies, and that was really the spark that started it.
So did you end up going to film school or?
I really wanted to, and I convinced myself by high school I was making really ridiculous films with all my friends, like everybody does in high school. And we were like, yeah, we're going to film school. I'm going to go for screenwriting and directing. And then I got sidetracked with trying to be in a band, and I did that
Oh,
for
so you play instruments. Okay.
yeah. So my good friend and I actually that I was in a band with for like 5 years, him and I did the score for Gunfighter Paradise
Oh,
together. So that was really fun to do that score. But long story short, about my mid 20s, I decided to stop with the the music career and go back to college. And I went to the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and I went for international studies. For some reason, I was already making so much as far as films and animations, and I was freelancing as a photojournalist for all kinds of little publications in Asheville and places like that. That I just the thought of going to film school didn't appeal to me. I wanted to go for something that I thought would give me more exposure to the world, and international studies did that. So I got to study abroad, and that's how I made my first documentaries, and really got me going. And I took all kinds of wonderful classes at UNCA, and it was a international studies program was really great for me. I think that actually made me a much better filmmaker than I think if I had gone to a film school when I was a teenager.
yeah, well, you get more experience in life, I guess. Now your documentary feature debut, the F11 and Be There, like, can you tell us a little bit about it and how it came to be?
Sure. So that's about the photographer Burke Uzzle, and Burke took a lot of famous photographs that most people recognize. The couple embracing at Woodstock, which became the cover of the Woodstock album. Martin Luther King Jr. in his casket. He took photographs from the 50s when he was delivering papers. And he's still taking them today in his late 80s. But when I met him, which was 2016, he was just turning 78, I believe. And he had been the president of Magnum. He come up through, he was a protege of Henri Cartier-Bresson. He was good buddies with Ansel Adams. And so he had this really incredible body of work. So if you go, when I went into his archive, I just saw the entire second half of the 20th century all there. His photographs have been he was the youngest hire for Life magazine when he was 23 years old. And so he's had this phenomenal career. And he just kind of, he was all still making these really great bodies of work, and nobody really knew. A couple of museums in North Carolina knew, and they were giving him exhibitions, but the rest of the world didn't know. And so a mutual friend of ours said, "You need to go meet this guy." And I hadn't really intended to make a feature documentary on an artist. I just, on the recommendation of a friend, went and met Burke at an art museum, and I saw his work, and I was like, "Oh my God, I've been looking at all this stuff since I was a kid in these Life magazine collections." And this is he's such an incredible storyteller and such a nutcase in all the best ways. And so we became really fast friends. And I decided, okay, I'm going to make a feature narrative about this guy. And so we traveled around together for about a year, and that was my first feature film.
Cool. Now, you've done many roles like writer, director, producer, cinematographer. Like, was it just opportunities that came by and you decided to try, or was it essential to like indie filmmaking for you to do everything?
It was more the essential part of it, because all of us know in the indie world, whether it's whether it's writing and publishing or filmmaking, if you have a very famous last name, you're good to go. Or if you have a lot of money, you're set. You can get your way into the industry, as long as you've built those craft and some expertise in one of the parts of filmmaking. But for me, it was one of those things where I was like, okay, I'm gonna learn how to edit. I'm gonna learn how to shoot. I'm gonna put these things together. I'm gonna start making things and putting them out in the world, and that's essentially what got my career going. Is I was just making a lot of things, wearing all the hats, which is fun, but when you're working with your friends and you're just making experimental narratives and music videos and those kinds of things. But in doing that, some of the work that I was putting out got noticed by some producers, and that's what ended up leading, to the beginning of my career in film, was just doing everything and learning every part of it and putting things together. So it was just kind of an essential skills building process that I went through. And I love doing all of it. There's not one part of it that I really I think writing and directing is my favorite part of it. But I teach cinematography for the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, and I've taught cinematography and directing and writing at Brooklyn College, and all of the parts are super fun. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's really nice when you do end up on a set where you have all those roles dedicated to people and you don't have to do all of them. It's a fun process.
Okay, now can you tell us a little bit about your latest feature, Gunfighter Paradise? Give us a little synopsis and what sparked the idea for it.
Sure. So Gunfighter Paradise is a really dark satire. I would call it a dark comedy. People call it a dark comedy horror, thriller. It's all sorts of genres, but there's a lot of really dry humor in it, and the film gets much darker as it progresses. But it's really just kind of based on kind of the American psychosis of today. I grew up in the world of very conservative Christianity, although the other side of my family are very progressive. So I kind of was navigating those two worlds growing up. And then as my blinder started to open a little bit and I saw more of the rest of the world and the history of the United States and the history of the Native Americans, I started to think a little bit differently about my beliefs and my ideology. And so the main character in that film is just kind of the most extreme version of how someone can end up, given only one, view on, the only one worldview and only one view on the ideology of spirituality and religion. So it's a very, very dark satire that's based in the South where I grew up.
Oh, was it based on anybody you knew?
Oh, absolutely. I know so many people that are in that film, and if I started talking about the autobiographical elements that are in the film, we would be here all day. So there's just so many things that are baked in that I actually saw and experienced, those kinds of things.
Okay, so what made you interested in exploring this topic after a documentary about, like art? I guess this is kind of different, right? So,
It's definitely a big left turn, 100%. I had made that documentary, and it was just such a wonderful experience because it was seriously Burke and his camera and me and my camera, and I went and made this doc and went out, and it was wonderful. We did lots of great festivals. We got lots of great reviews. It did a lot of wonderful things for my career, and I've always wanted to make a dark comedy of some kind, and I'd been stewing on this idea for a long time, and you know. I've been writing ideas down, and so I kind of felt that it was just time that I was looking at the state of the United States and where we were as a society. I was looking at how I grew up in my experience and thinking this kind of matches up. This kind of makes sense if I go ahead and make this right now. It's kind of the times right now as far as relevance, and it also just kind of lined up where I had done some bigger commercial projects and where I could stash some money away to make a narrative, and obviously on a very small budget, but I had enough to where I knew I could wrangle all my friends and get them together and make this film, and it just felt like the right time to make it.
Now, what kind of conversations do you hope the film will provoke?
I'm really hoping we've had some really wonderful conversations, because there's as much as it's poking holes in Southern Christianity and conservative corporate Christianity in general, and it's making a lot of jokes that are based in the South and poking fun at Southerners. But at the same time, it's doing that. It's definitely a love letter to the South because I grew up in there, and there's a lot of beautiful things about the South, and I wanted to hopefully strike that balance. And you never know how it's going to land until you show it to an audience full of Southerners and Northerners and see how they respond to it. And it's been really, really delightful in that the biggest laughs that we've gotten, full out, 300 people in an auditorium belly laughing, were in the middle of the deep South where I grew up. So they got the humor, and even though it's poking fun at their culture, I'm part of that culture, so I'm allowed to do that. It was really delightful in that way. But as far as conversations, it's sparked a lot of conversations as far as the role of fear in religion, and especially in Christianity in America and everywhere. But, that's a lot of what the film is about as well, is being locked into, religion because of fear rather than because of kindness and wanting to be a good person and be good to other people. And so we've had a lot of really, really great Q&As and conversations. And that's my hope for the film, is that it just continues to do that. And we can have these conversations, with every extreme from left and right politically, from completely atheist to very hardcore religious. Like I do want to be up for those kinds of folks to all be able to come into a theater and have those conversations.
Now, I'm Canadian, so
Hmm.
when you talk about the North and the South, what do you think distinguishes the South? All I can think of is fried chicken. I'm sorry, and I know the history of the plantations and stuff like that, but I'm not
Yeah.
really quite sure. And like, there seems to be more gentleman demeanor in the South. That's what I compared to like New York or something like the
Right.
Brooklyn people. I'm not really sure. Like, what would you describe as a Southerner versus Northerner kind of differences?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, so I'm split between North Carolina and Midtown East, in Manhattan. So those are the two, I'm always
Yeah,
commuting between the two, right? So it's very interesting for me because when I first moved to New York, I was like, oh wow, these people are all like got their eyes down and they're walking really
yeah,
fast and
looking at the phone.
yeah, looking at their phone, and they don't have time for you and get out of my way. But at the same time, once you actually do grab, not grab somebody, you shouldn't ever grab anybody in New York. Once you ask somebody something, they're always, oh yeah, it's right over here, I'll help you out. And I found people in New York to be just as nice as people anywhere in the South. But there is kind of a thing where the Southern charm and the Southern hospitality, it's a real thing. Like people will, if you're broken down, they'll just, some random person will just pull off, and help you change your tire. And I've had it happen a million times. I've done it for other people. Everybody in the South says ma'am and sir, no matter your age. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. Even if it's wildly offensive, they're like, "Why are you calling me ma'am? I'm only in my 30s,"
Yeah.
But I grew up doing, and I still do it, and I have to apologize for it because I'm like, so, I'm sorry, I'm from the South. We say ma'am and sir, and
Mhm.
everybody holds the door for everybody else. There is a certain kind of poetry and southern folks and the way that they do things. That doesn't mean there's not extreme darkness and a lot of bad things about the South. Because obviously we could just look at the Civil War. We know all about why the South can be a bad, dangerous place at times. But anywhere in America, is a bad and dangerous place at times. But I think there's just a very subtle difference, in the way that people treat each other just generally, and the pace. People in the South, go with a little slower pace than the people
Yeah.
up north.
Yeah, I guess here it's like Toronto versus Vancouver and Montreal, sort of the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, Toronto
Right.
wants to be New York, but we're not. But you know, but we try. We try.
Yeah. Yeah. Toronto's nice though. Toronto's very nice.
It's different. It's very quiet
Yeah.
here. I mean, I used
Yeah.
to, go a lot. Every couple of months, I visit my friend in Buffalo. Like, she lives in Grand Island.
Mhm.
But lately, we've been too scared to go. So
Yeah.
maybe when
Yeah.
things settle down a little bit politically in the country, right? So
Oh man, we can all hope, right? We can all
yeah,
hope.
we'll see what happens. I just don't want to be
Um,
dinged by taxes and tariffs and whatever.
um, you and
So
me both. You and me both.
yeah. Okay, now switching gears a bit, like any advice for new filmmakers? Like, is there anything that you learned over the years that you wish someone told you earlier?
Yeah, I do. I I think the idea is we get hung up too often on certain ideas, and we spend so much time chasing a specific thing. And I think when you're starting out, the idea is to just make as much stuff as possible. I think you can try to hone something to perfection when you're starting out, and you're really spinning your wheels in a lot of ways when it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be made and finished. And I was very lucky to be surrounded by a group of artists who weren't filmmakers, but were really talented, and they just filled out roles as production designer and art director, and all these different wonderful artists in Asheville that I connected with. And we made all these music videos and all these short films and all this wonderful stuff. And so making as much stuff as possible very early on, and also building a community of people who are also interested in making those things, makes all the difference in the world, because you just make so much work and you get so much experience by making all that work. And then you really kind of get an understanding for who you are as an artist, what the kinds of things you want to make, and how you operate in a community of like-minded people. And on top of making a lot of work really early on to kind of learn the different crafts and learn the different parts of filmmaking, I think it's also really important to, once you get comfortable with who you are and how you make films, if you're still in the very indie world, if you're not, off directing some, project that has a big producer and a lot of money, and you have a very specific role and you just need to knock those things out every day, if you're still making things with freedom, with a lot of freedom involved, and on lower budgets, you can't be too precious. The idea is to do your absolute best and to get the best shot, that you can with the light that you've got, or the lights that you have. Get the best dialogue and interaction between your characters that you can get. But if you're too precious about those things, it burns a lot of time, and your project suffers. If you don't allow everybody who's involved to be free in some sense. It can really hurt your film in a lot of ways. So, yeah, that would be my advice, is just to have as much fun as possible when you're in the indie world and you have all this freedom, and to not be so precious with it, and to really, to really. I've seen so many independent films that, if they had not been locked into their script and so precious with every single word, that it wouldn't have come across so forced and so stale on screen, if they would allow their characters to be a little bit more natural. So that's what I mean by being precious. Like, I wrote the script a certain way, but if it wasn't landing with my characters, we would have a conversation. How would you say that? And then it became more natural, and then the scene worked. It's because you're not married to this thing as this is the Bible of what we're making.
Yeah, because I mean, I only write, but I mean, when you work with editors, you have to listen to them. You can't like
Right.
not listen to them. I mean, they want the best for the project too. And with film, you have so many people, like you do have to compromise sometimes. And maybe like if they're the actor, right? They're the one performing, so maybe they just can't say the lines the way you wrote them, right? So.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, okay, so for like Gunfighter's Paradise, so after you finish the script, like, was it hard? I guess the next step is to get funding and to just get it going. Like, after you have it on paper, like, there's all these other steps you have to go through. Was it
hmm
a challenge? Was that the most challenging part, I guess, of making a film? Or
It usually is the most challenging part. And for Gunfighter Paradise, it wasn't only because I realized as I was writing it that it was only going to be able to be made a certain way. And that if I spent the year or two fundraising and talking to producers and selling them on the script, and then getting a casting director and casting it with all these people, it was going to be it is really difficult. It's extremely difficult to get all those pieces going and get your producers and get the money involved and get the dates and all those things. And so with Gunfighter Paradise, it was a much different process, to where I knew I had a certain amount of money, which wasn't much at all, all set aside. I said, this is what I can get people hotel rooms with. This is what I can buy tequila and Mexican food and feed my cast, and I knew that I could find a lot of the locations through friends and family in North Carolina where the film is set. And also I wrote the film in a very sparse way where I knew that I could cast all my friends, even though they're not actors, they're all musicians and performers and they're not afraid of the camera. I could cast them kind of as themselves playing this role, and it might come across pretty naturally, which ended up working out really well. And nobody got paid at all. Everyone just jumped in and did it for free because they wanted to be in a film, and they knew I was doing an indie film, and they all said, yeah, sure, I'll come be your art designer, and do all those things. And so it was really, that part of it was extremely easy because everyone just said yes and they jumped in and we made the film. But typically, yeah, that is most of the time the hardest part, is even for documentaries, just getting the budget together to where you can go out and make the film is really tough.
Okay. Now, like you've met a lot of people. Did you have any advice from other people that you thought was useful?
Yeah, I have a lot of colleagues, especially in New York, who are, just absolutely acclaimed, Academy Award winning and nominated producers and actors and actresses and people that, I do projects with that are just, some of the best of the best. And I've learned a lot from them over the years. I've been in New York for almost 10 years now and spent a lot of time with them. And one person who, the most important of all of those is she passed away, unfortunately, but my executive producer on Gunfighter Paradise was Nancy Bursky. And Nancy, was just an unbelievable filmmaker. She, has won all the awards and is renowned, founded Full Frame Documentary Festival in Durham. And she kind of took me under her wing when I moved to New York because she had seen my first documentary and did my Q&A, and we became really good friends. We lived pretty close to each other on the east side, and so she just started taking me and introducing me to everybody in New York. And as I did other projects, and as she was the executive producer on Gunfighter, we had a lot of conversations where she's been in the industry 40 years longer than I have, so she really had this amazing life experience and work experience, and her notes were always just so specific and so perfect, so I think it's always good to have mentors and people, that you can talk to and riff with and get feedback with and take it very seriously, because they're telling you these things because they want to help your film. They're not telling you
Yeah.
these things because they just have an opinion,
Okay. Now, your documentary, the F11 and there won an Emmy Award. Did that
Mhm.
change the way you did things at all? Like, was it like a life-changing thing?
It was life changing in that it was funny because all my friends freaked out, and it was
You know someone famous?
yeah, yeah, it was so funny, but it's really wild how things happen in the industry because we that happened not long after we got this really wonderful review in the New York Times, right? That New York Times critics pick, which for me in my head, I was sweating because I knew it was coming, but I thought they might
Hmm.
they might tear this film apart, and I'm
Yeah,
never
you
going to
don't know.
recover from. You don't know. And so when it came out to be this really wonderful review, I was like, oh, man, I'm set. I'm going to get an agent now, and I'm like, this is going to be awesome. And then all that happened, and we got calls, and yes, we got a distributor, and we got all this really cool stuff that happened, but it really wasn't this giant life-changing sweeping event that I thought it was. But that's also the documentary world. There's a big difference between doing things in the documentary world and awards and reviews and documentary versus narrative. Documentary is a much tougher world. It's a much harder sell for budgets and for distributors and for theaters and for everything than it is for narrative. So no, it's awesome. I had a blast, and all my family and friends, they definitely have all had a blast because of those things that happened with F11 to be there. But I will say I wouldn't say it was a giant life-changing event, but I will say that as we all know, those little stars on your resume do make people take you more seriously, and people are looking for that, right? And once you have a good review and a big national press, and once you have an award of some kind, people do pay attention, and they do take you seriously when you're sitting down to have a conversation. They look at you differently, and that's just part of the game that you have to play, and hope that you're lucky enough to land in those situations.
So what's next for you? Are you gonna go, are you doing another documentary? Are you going to do another film or?
I'm doing both. So I have another script that's getting shopped around right now, and then I have another film. Not sure when we're going to start production, but that will be a much bigger budget as an independent budget, not a not a big budget, and that'll be in the Southwest. But I'm currently working on a documentary about Bernard Purdie, who is kind of one of the most legendary drummers of all time. He was Aretha Franklin's band leader for 30 years. He created a signature drum beat called the Purdie Shuffle, which everybody plays. He's been playing for everybody under the sun since like 1963, and he's still playing live everywhere, and he's like 86 now.
Oh, wow.
So I'm wrapping up a documentary about him that will go into post-production this summer.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on the show.
The Artsy Raven is produced by Dark Helix Press. Introduction voiceover by Chris Gorman. Music by Tim Moore. Please access your bonus content on the Patreon website. Thank you very much for listening, and please stay safe.